A man in a coma cannot fall in love, the lawyer said quietly as the wedding guests stared at the young nurse standing beside the unconscious billionaire CEO. But the moment Clara Bennett slid the platinum ring onto Ethan Whitmore's finger, the heart monitor beside his hospital bed suddenly leaped faster. A sharp beep echoed through the private suite, cutting through the cold silence like a crack of lightning. Every head in the room turned toward the machine. For one impossible second, it almost sounded like Ethan Whitmore was responding to her. The Whitmore Medical Tower rose 30 stories above downtown Chicago, all glass and steel reflecting the gray winter sky. Inside the penthouse recovery wing, the air smelled of antiseptic, white roses, and polished marble. Clara felt painfully small standing beneath the crystal chandeliers in her borrowed ivory dress. She wasn't supposed to belong in a room like this. Not with these people. Not with billionaires. Not with cameras flashing every time she breathed. She was only 24 years old. A nurse from the South Side whose mother was drowning in medical debt after years of heart disease. 3 weeks earlier, Clara had been working double shifts at St. Mary's Hospital, surviving on cafeteria coffee and 4 hours of sleep. Then Lucas Reed appeared with an offer so unbelievable she thought it was cruel. Marry Ethan Whitmore. Stay legally by his side for 6 months. In return, every penny of her mother's treatment would be paid in full. At first, Clara had refused. The idea sounded monstrous. A business arrangement wrapped inside a wedding vow. But then she saw her mother sleeping beneath thin hospital blankets, while overdue bills stacked beside the bed like bricks crushing their future. Clara realized poverty did not always scream. Sometimes it whispered in quiet hospital rooms at 2 a.m. Sometimes it forced impossible choices onto good people. Ethan Whitmore had once been the youngest tech billionaire in America. Magazine covers called him brilliant, ruthless, untouchable. Then 6 months ago, his car slid off a rain-soaked highway outside Seattle. Since that night, he had never opened his eyes again. The world believed he was already halfway gone. But his family needed him legally alive to stop the company board from tearing Whitmore Technologies apart. So now Clara stood beside a hospital bed pretending to be the wife of a man who had never spoken to her. Around her, the guests whispered behind champagne glasses. Gold digger. She trapped herself a billionaire. Look at her shoes. She probably bought them yesterday. Their words stung, but Clara kept her eyes on Ethan. He looked nothing like the arrogant CEO she remembered from television interviews. Without the tailored suits and sharp expressions, he simply looked tired. Pale. Human. A faint scar disappeared into his dark hairline. Machines breathed for him in soft mechanical rhythms. The officiant cleared his throat nervously. Do you accept Ethan Whitmore as your lawful husband? Clara hesitated. The room waited. Snow drifted quietly outside the giant windows overlooking the city skyline. Then she looked at Ethan's motionless face and whispered, I do. Her voice trembled so softly she barely heard it herself. And suddenly the monitor beside the bed jumped again. Beep. 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 Faster this time. One of the nurses gasped. A doctor stepped closer in disbelief. Clara froze as Ethan's fingers twitched beneath hers for the briefest second. Then the billionaire's pulse slowed once more, returning to silence. But Clara could not ignore what she felt in that moment. Because for just one heartbeat inside that cold hospital suite, it felt as though Ethan Whitmore had hurt her. By morning, the internet had already turned Clara Bennett into a villain. Her face was everywhere. On television screens mounted inside airport lounges. On gossip websites glowing in dark apartments at 3 a.m. On social media feeds filled with strangers who knew nothing about her life but judged her anyway. Young nurse marries unconscious billionaire. Gold digger steals dying CEO. The Coma bride. The headlines spread across America faster than wildfire in dry grass. Clara sat alone near the massive window inside the Whitmore penthouse recovery suite, staring down at Chicago traffic crawling 29 floors below. Snow still clung to the sidewalks in dirty gray piles. Her phone would not stop vibrating. Hundreds of messages. Reporters. Unknown numbers. Cruel comments from people hidden behind profile pictures and fake names. She turned the phone face down on the marble table beside her untouched coffee. The room around her looked less like a hospital and more like a luxury hotel built for royalty. Soft cream walls. Imported Italian furniture. Fresh orchids replaced every morning. A fireplace glowing beneath a giant oil painting worth more than Clara could earn in 10 lifetimes. But none of it felt warm. None of it felt alive. The only steady sound came from Ethan's monitor. Beep. Pause. Beep. The rhythm filled the silence between them. Clara looked toward the bed where Ethan Whitmore lay motionless beneath white blankets. Morning light fell across his face, softening the sharp features that once intimidated entire boardrooms. Without the headlines and billion-dollar reputation, he looked strangely young. Vulnerable in a way the world would never believe. She still could not stop thinking about his fingers moving during the ceremony. The doctors insisted it was involuntary muscle activity. Nothing more. But Clara had spent years caring for patients in critical condition. She knew the difference between reflex and response. Somewhere deep down, she felt certain Ethan had heard her voice. A sharp knock interrupted her thoughts. The double doors opened before she could answer. Victoria Whitmore entered the room like winter itself. Elegant. Cold. Untouchable. Her silver jewelry caught the morning light as she walked across the marble floor in a perfectly tailored cream suit. Nothing about her looked accidental. Even grief seemed carefully styled around her. "The press is becoming a disaster," Victoria said flatly without greeting Clara. "You are embarrassing this family." Clara stood slowly from the chair beside Ethan's bed. "I never asked for reporters." Victoria's expression barely shifted. "No. But girls like you rarely refuse attention once they taste it." The words landed softly, but they cut deep. Clara lowered her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. She had heard versions of this her entire life. Rich people had a way of making poverty sound like a personality flaw. Victoria stepped closer to Ethan, adjusting the sleeve of his blanket with mechanical precision. "Not affection. Presentation. You will follow the agreement exactly," she continued quietly. "Stay beside him. Smile when necessary. And remember your place." Clara looked at Ethan again. Machines breathing for him. Sunlight warming skin that could not feel it. Something inside her tightened painfully. "He is still a person," Clara whispered. Victoria's eyes turned icy. "No, Miss Bennet. He is a company. And companies survive because people like me make difficult decisions." The room fell silent again except for the monitor beside the bed. Then suddenly it happened. Beep. 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 Ethan's pulse climbed sharply the moment Clara reached for his hand. Victoria froze. The monitor continued racing for several impossible seconds before slowing once more into its normal rhythm. Clara stared at Ethan in shock. His eyes remained closed. His face never changed. But this time she knew what she saw. And judging by the fear flickering briefly across Victoria Whitmore's face, she knew it too. The first night Clara stayed alone with Ethan, the city outside disappeared beneath freezing rain and silver fog. Chicago glowed faintly through the giant glass windows like another world far below them. Inside the recovery suite, everything felt still except for the steady rhythm of machines keeping Ethan Whitmore alive. Clara sat beside his bed wearing oversized gray scrubs borrowed from the hospital staff because her suitcase had not yet arrived from her tiny apartment. The Billionaire's private wing was so quiet she could hear the soft crackle of the fireplace across the room and the distant hum of elevators somewhere deep inside the building. It did not feel like a marriage. It felt like standing inside the pause between two lives. Clara looked down at the platinum ring resting on her finger. It caught the firelight every time she moved her hand. Expensive. Heavy. Unreal. Earlier that evening, 3 members of the Whitmore board had visited the suite. None of them looked directly at her when they spoke. She was not a person to them. Only a temporary solution wrapped in a wedding dress. One of the men had actually asked Lucas Reed in front of her. How long before the public loses interest in the nurse? As though she could not hear him standing 3 feet away. Clara had spent most of her life being invisible. But there was something uniquely painful about becoming visible only so people could judge you. She exhaled slowly and glanced back toward Ethan. You know, she whispered softly into the silence. You are probably the only person in this city who does not hate me right now. The monitor beside him continued its calm mechanical rhythm. Beep. Pause. Beep. Clara gave a tired smile. That was a joke, by the way. She shifted closer to the bed and carefully adjusted the blanket near his shoulder. His skin felt cool beneath her fingertips. Not cold. Just distant somehow. Like touching someone standing very far away. Most people assumed patients in comas existed in darkness. But Clara had seen things during her years as a nurse that medicine could not fully explain. Patients remembering conversations they should never have heard. Tears forming during familiar songs. Hands reacting to certain voices. Somewhere inside Ethan Whitmore, she believed something was still listening. My mother used to sing while cleaning apartments, Clara said quietly after a long silence. She said singing made hard places feel smaller. Rain tapped softly against the windows. When I was little, we lived in a studio apartment above a laundromat. Every winter the heater broke. We used to sleep wearing coats. She laughed gently under her breath. You probably never had to do that. For several seconds nothing changed. Then suddenly the monitor skipped faster. Beep. 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 Clara froze. Her eyes darted toward the screen. Ethan's pulse had risen again. Slowly, she leaned closer to him. Ethan? She whispered. The machine steadied almost immediately, returning to normal. Clara stared at his face, searching for any sign of movement. Nothing. His eyes remained closed. His breathing stayed slow beneath the ventilator support. Yet her heart would not stop racing. She reached carefully for his hand resting beside him on the blanket. Can you hear me? She asked softly. Silence answered her at first. Then something brushed lightly against her fingers. So small she almost doubted it happened at all. A twitch. Clara stopped breathing. She looked down in disbelief at Ethan's motionless hand beneath hers. And for the first time since entering the Whitmore world, fear mixed with hope inside her chest. Because if Ethan Whitmore truly could hear her, then somewhere inside that silent darkness, he might also know exactly what his family was hiding. 3 nights after the wedding, Clara stopped believing the Whitmore family was simply protecting Ethan's company. Something colder lived inside that building. Something hidden beneath polished smiles and $1,000,000 suits. The realization came just after midnight, while the recovery wings slept beneath dim amber lights. Rainwater slid down the giant windows overlooking Lake Michigan, turning the city outside into blurred rivers of gold and white. Clara had gone searching for coffee because exhaustion sat behind her eyes like wet sand. She moved quietly through the silent executive hallway wearing soft gray scrubs and white sneakers, trying not to wake the overnight staff. The Whitmore private floor felt eerie after dark. Too clean. Too still. Paintings stared down from expensive walls. Security cameras blinked softly above elevator doors. Even the air smelled expensive somehow, cedarwood and polished stone instead of disinfectant. Clara passed the family conference room when voices stopped her cold. The doors were almost fully closed, but not enough. Victoria Whitmore stood inside beneath the long chandelier table, speaking sharply into the darkness. The board meeting cannot wait another month, she said. If Ethan remains unresponsive, control transfers temporarily through emergency proxy authority. Another voice answered quietly. Male. Nervous. But if he wakes up... Victoria cut him off instantly. He is not going to wake up. Clara froze beside the doorway. Her pulse quickened. The doctor said there are signs of cognitive response. The man continued carefully. Especially around the nurse. A long silence followed. Then came the sound of a glass being set down. That girl is becoming a complication, Victoria said coldly. Which means she may need to be removed from the situation. Clara felt her stomach tighten. She stepped backward instinctively, but her sneaker brushed lightly against a decorative metal stand near the wall. The tiny scrape sounded deafening in the silence. Inside the room, the conversation stopped immediately. Clara's breath caught. Footsteps approached the doors. Fast. She turned and walked quickly down the hallway, trying not to panic. Her heart hammered harder with every step. The elevator seemed impossibly far away. Behind her, the conference room doors opened. "Miss Bennet?" Victoria's voice echoed smoothly through the hallway. Clara stopped near the windows and turned slowly. Victoria approached with the same elegant calm she always carried, though something dangerous hid behind her eyes now. "You should be resting," Victoria said. "Patients require stable caregivers." Clara forced herself to remain steady. "I could not sleep." Victoria studied her face carefully, almost like reading a contract for hidden details. "Then perhaps you should remember why you are here," she said softly. "You were offered a temporary arrangement. Nothing more." Clara swallowed. "What if Ethan wakes up?" The question lingered heavily between them. Victoria smiled then, but it was the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "People in comas do not magically recover because a pretty nurse holds their hand." Clara said nothing. Because somewhere deep inside herself, she no longer believed that was true. Victoria stepped closer. Her voice lowered almost to a whisper. "This family has spent millions preserving Ethan's dignity. Do not mistake emotional attachment for importance." Then she walked away, heels clicking softly against marble floors until the hallway swallowed the sound entirely. Clara remained frozen beside the window overlooking the storm below. Snow mixed with rain against the glass while traffic lights flickered far beneath the skyscraper. Her chest felt tight. Not from fear alone. From certainty. Victoria Whitmore was not protecting Ethan. She was protecting something else. Something worth more than grief. Clara returned quickly to Ethan's suite. The room greeted her with soft darkness and the familiar rhythm of machines. Beep. Pause. Beep. She moved beside the bed and stared down at him beneath the dim bedside lamp. "What happened to you?" she whispered. For several seconds nothing changed. Then Ethan's heartbeat suddenly accelerated again the moment her fingers touched his hand. And this time, his eyelids moved. After that night, Clara stopped seeing Ethan Whitmore as a billionaire trapped inside a hospital bed. She started seeing him as a lonely man surrounded by people who had forgotten how to love him. The change happened slowly, in small quiet moments no cameras would ever capture. Every morning at 6:30, sunlight spilled through the giant windows of the recovery suite, painting pale gold across the marble floors. Clara would open the curtains carefully while the city below slowly woke beneath winter clouds. Steam rose from coffee carts on crowded sidewalks 30 stories beneath them. Ferries moved across the gray lake like tiny shadows. Somewhere far below, life continued normally while Ethan remained frozen between worlds. Clara began talking to him more each day. Not because doctors told her to. Because silence in that room felt unbearably sad. She brushed his dark hair away from his forehead after the overnight nurses rushed through basic care without looking him in the eyes. She adjusted his blankets when the room became cold. She played soft jazz music from her phone because she once read an article saying familiar rhythms sometimes reached coma patients. One afternoon she even laughed quietly while reading him terrible online comments about herself. "Apparently I am either a criminal mastermind or the world's luckiest waitress," she told him with a tired smile. "Honestly, either sounds accurate." The monitor beside him answered with its steady rhythm. Beep. Pause. Beep. Clara leaned back in the chair beside his bed and studied the room around them. Fresh orchids. White roses. Imported artwork. Everything expensive. Everything perfect. Yet nothing personal. No family photographs. No signs anyone truly sat with him before she arrived. "You know what I think?" she whispered softly. "I think everyone here is waiting for something from you. Your company. Your money. Your name. But nobody asks what you might need. Her eyes drifted toward Ethan's motionless hand resting against the blanket. Carefully, she reached for it. His fingers felt warmer lately. She noticed that yesterday too. Maybe you are tired, Clara said quietly. Maybe being powerful all the time is exhausting. Outside the suite, Whitmore executives came and went in dark tailored suits carrying tablets and legal documents. Clara overheard conversations in hallways almost daily now. Stock prices. Emergency votes. Temporary leadership transfers. Nobody talked about Ethan like a son or a human being anymore. Only percentages and liabilities. Late one snowy evening, Clara sat beside the bed reading aloud from a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird she found in the hospital gift shop downstairs. Her voice softened as she turned the pages beneath the warm bedside lamp. You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, she read quietly. Until you climb into his skin and walk around in it. The room remained still for several seconds. Then Ethan's pulse suddenly climbed again. Beep. 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 Clara looked up immediately. Ethan? She whispered. His heartbeat continued racing beneath the monitor. Faster than she had ever seen before. Her breath caught. Slowly, unbelievably, a single tear slipped from the corner of Ethan Whitmore's closed eye and rolled down toward his temple. Clara froze completely. The book slid from her lap onto the floor with a soft thud. Oh my God! She whispered. Her hands trembled as she reached carefully toward his face. The tear was real. Warm against her fingertips. Clara stared at him in disbelief while the monitor echoed louder through the room. Somewhere deep inside the silence surrounding him, Ethan Whitmore had heard her. And for the first time since the accident, it felt as though the man trapped inside the darkness was trying to find his way back. The tear changed everything. By sunrise, 3 neurologists and 2 private specialists were standing inside Ethan Whitmore's recovery suite studying monitor data with stunned expressions. Clara remained near the window clutching a paper cup of cold coffee while snow drifted slowly beyond the glass skyline. Nobody could explain what had happened the night before. Patients in long-term comas were not supposed to respond emotionally to spoken words. They were not supposed to cry. One of the older doctors adjusted his glasses while staring at Ethan's charts. His neurological activity increased significantly during verbal interaction, he said quietly. Especially when Miss Bennett was speaking. Another physician frowned. That level of response is highly unusual after 6 months. Clara looked toward Ethan lying motionless beneath soft white blankets. Morning sunlight touched his face again, warming the sharp lines around his jaw. He looked peaceful. Almost as though he had finally stopped fighting something in his sleep. Victoria Whitmore stood near the doorway listening silently. Her elegant posture never shifted, but Clara noticed the tension in her perfectly folded hands. Are you suggesting he is conscious? Victoria asked carefully. The doctors exchanged uncertain looks. Not fully conscious, one answered. But there are signs he may recognize certain external stimuli. Clara lowered her eyes, trying to hide the sudden hope rising painfully inside her chest. Recognition. The word echoed inside her mind long after the doctors left the room. That afternoon, the snowstorm worsened outside. Thick gray clouds swallowed the city while icy wind rattled softly against the towering windows of the Whitmore penthouse wing. Clara stayed beside Ethan alone again after visiting hours ended. She sat reading quietly while a jazz piano playlist drifted softly through the room. The fireplace flickered nearby, filling the suite with golden light and shadows. I think they are scared of you waking up, Clara admitted softly after several minutes. Not because they miss you. Because they are afraid of losing control. Ethan remained still. Machines breathed gently beside him. Clara closed the book in her lap and sighed. Honestly, I understand what it feels like when people only see what they can take from you. Her voice grew quieter. When my father left, my mother worked 3 jobs cleaning houses. Some people would not even look at her while speaking. Like kindness was expensive. She smiled faintly to herself. But she still came home singing every night. Clara looked toward Ethan again. I think she would have liked you, she whispered. For a moment, only the fire crackled softly in the silence. Then the impossible happened again. Ethan's heartbeat accelerated sharply. Beep. 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 Clara sat upright immediately. Ethan? She breathed. His fingers twitched against the blanket once. Then again. Stronger this time. Clara rushed closer to the bed, her pulse racing. Can you hear me? She asked softly. Suddenly, Ethan's entire monitor activity spiked higher than ever before. Oxygen levels. Heart rate. Brain response. Every machine surrounding him lit up with rapid changes. Clara stared in shock as Ethan's eyebrows tightened faintly, almost like someone struggling through a distant dream. Doctor! Clara called toward the hallway. Nurses rushed into the suite seconds later, followed by 2 specialists. Alarms echoed softly through the room while staff surrounded Ethan's bed in disbelief. This is incredible, one doctor whispered while checking the monitors. Another nurse looked directly at Clara. What were you saying to him? Clara could barely answer. Her hands still trembled from what she had seen. Ethan's heartbeat slowly stabilized again beneath the noise of medical equipment. But just before his body settled completely still once more, his hand moved toward Clara's voice. Not randomly. Not by reflex. Intentionally. His fingers closed weakly around hers for 2 brief seconds before relaxing again. The entire room fell silent. And across the suite, Victoria Whitmore's face turned completely pale. The next morning, Clara woke to the sound of raised voices outside Ethan's recovery suite. The sharp echo of expensive shoes striking marble floors carried through the hallway long before she opened the door. Chicago disappeared behind thick snowfall outside the giant windows, turning the city into a pale blur of white and silver. Inside the executive wing, tension hung in the air like smoke before a storm. Clara stepped quietly into the hallway and immediately saw Victoria Whitmore standing near the nurses' station speaking to 2 hospital administrators. The transfer has already been approved, Victoria said firmly. A private neurological facility in Switzerland is prepared to receive him within 48 hours. Clara stopped cold. Transfer? She asked before she could stop herself. Victoria turned slowly. Her expression sharpened instantly when she saw Clara standing there. This discussion does not concern you. Clara felt her stomach tighten. The doctor said he is improving. Improving? Victoria repeated with icy calm. A few involuntary responses are not recovery. Clara glanced toward Ethan's room behind her. Machines. Sunlight. His hand squeezing hers. None of that felt involuntary anymore. He responds to voices, Clara insisted quietly. Especially familiar ones. Victoria folded her arms. Exactly why emotional attachment is becoming dangerous. The words landed heavily. Clara stared at her in disbelief. You want to move him because of me. Victoria stepped closer, lowering her voice. Miss Bennet, you were brought here to stabilize a public image problem, not to interfere with family decisions. Clara's chest tightened with anger she could barely contain. He is not a business arrangement, she whispered. He is alive. For the first time, Victoria's composure cracked slightly. You have no idea what is at stake. Then she turned sharply and disappeared down the hallway with the administrators following behind her. Clara stood frozen for several seconds before rushing back into Ethan's suite. Warm light from the fireplace filled the room while snow swirled endlessly outside the glass skyline. Ethan lay exactly where she left him, silent beneath the blankets. But suddenly the room no longer felt safe. Clara moved quickly beside the bed and reached for his hand. They are trying to take you away, she whispered urgently. I do not know why, but they are scared of you waking up. The monitor beside him remained steady at first. Beep. Pause. Beep. Clara swallowed hard. Ethan, if you can hear me, you need to fight. Nothing happened. The silence felt crushing. Clara lowered her head, exhausted and afraid. "Please," she whispered softly, "do not disappear before you come back." Then suddenly every machine beside the bed erupted at once. Beep. 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 Ethan's heart rate surged violently higher than Clara had ever seen. Oxygen monitors flashed rapidly across the screen. Clara jumped to her feet in shock. "Nurse!" she called toward the hallway. But before anyone reached the room, Ethan's hand gripped hers with unmistakable strength. Not weak. Not accidental. Strong enough to stop her breath completely. Clara stared down in disbelief. Ethan's fingers tightened around her hand as though holding on to the sound of her voice itself. And then something even more impossible happened. His breathing changed. Slower. Deeper. Like someone fighting desperately through heavy darkness toward the surface. Nurses rushed inside seconds later while alarms echoed across the recovery wing. Doctors crowded around the monitors in confusion. One specialist looked pale while studying Ethan's neurological scans. "This should not be possible," he whispered. Across the room, Victoria Whitmore arrived just in time to see Ethan refusing to let go of Clara's hand. Her face drained of color completely. Because for the first time since the accident, Ethan Whitmore was not reacting to medicine. He was reacting to her. The storm arrived just after midnight. Wind slammed against the 30-story windows hard enough to rattle the glass while snow buried downtown Chicago beneath swirling sheets of white. Emergency alerts flashed briefly across television screens throughout the hospital warning residents to stay indoors. Inside the Whitmore recovery wing, lights dimmed once before stabilizing again. Clara looked up from the chair beside Ethan's bed, unease tightening inside her chest. The entire floor felt strange that night. Too quiet. Too empty. Earlier that evening, Victoria had left suddenly after a heated phone call with the Whitmore board. Most of the overnight staff had been reassigned downstairs because of the storm. Only a skeleton crew remained in the executive wing. Clara stood near the giant windows watching lightning flicker silently behind thick clouds over Lake Michigan. The city below looked distant and fragile beneath the snowstorm. "You picked a dramatic night to improve," she whispered softly toward Ethan. The fireplace cast warm amber light across the room while machines breathed steadily beside the bed. Clara walked back toward him carrying a damp cloth to cool the fever that had appeared earlier that evening. His skin felt warmer than usual beneath her fingertips now. More alive somehow. "The doctors think you are fighting your way back," she said quietly while adjusting his blanket. "I think maybe you are tired of being alone." Ethan's monitor answered with its familiar rhythm. Beep. Pause. Beep. Then suddenly the lights flickered again. Once. Twice. The room plunged into darkness. Every machine beside Ethan let out a sharp warning tone at the exact same moment. Clara froze. Emergency backup lights failed to activate immediately. The only illumination came from distant lightning flashing blue against the windows. "No, no, no," Clara whispered, rushing toward the monitors. Oxygen support alarms screamed through the darkened suite, while the storm roared outside like an ocean. Clara grabbed the emergency phone beside the bed. Dead. Her pulse spiked with panic. "Help!" she shouted toward the hallway, but the wind swallowed her voice beneath the chaos echoing through the building. Ethan's oxygen levels dropped rapidly on the screen powered by backup battery. Clara reacted instantly. Years of nursing instinct pushed fear aside. She pulled the manual emergency oxygen bag from the wall cabinet and connected it carefully to Ethan's airway support. Her hands trembled violently as she began pumping oxygen manually. 1 breath. 2 breaths. 3 breaths. Snow hammered against the glass while darkness consumed the recovery wing around them. "Stay with me," Clara whispered desperately. "Please stay with me." Minutes passed. Then more. No staff arrived. Clara continued squeezing the oxygen bag over and over until her arms burned with exhaustion. Sweat dampened her hairline despite the cold room. Ethan lay motionless beneath flickering emergency lights while the storm outside seemed determined to tear the city apart. Clara's breathing became uneven. "I cannot lose you too," she whispered suddenly, tears filling her eyes before she could stop them. Her voice cracked softly in the darkness. "I spent my whole life watching people leave." She swallowed hard, still pumping oxygen steadily. "My father left. My mother almost died. And somehow," her hand shook, "somehow you became the only person here who ever listened to me." Lightning flashed brightly across the suite. For one brief second Ethan's face illuminated silver beneath the stormlight. Then Clara felt it. A weak pressure against her wrist. She froze completely. Ethan's fingers had moved again. Not twitching. Holding her. Clara stared down in shock as his hand tightened faintly around her sleeve. His breathing shifted beneath the ventilator support. Slower. Stronger. Then through the darkness and the sound of the storm, a rough broken whisper escaped his lips for the very first time. "Do not cry." Clara stopped breathing. Tears rolled silently down her face while the storm raged around them. Because after 6 months of silence, Ethan Whitmore had finally spoken. For several long seconds after Ethan whispered those 2 broken words, Clara could not move. The storm still howled against the skyscraper windows. Emergency alarms still blinked red across the darkened recovery suite. But none of it felt real anymore. All she could hear was his voice echoing softly inside her chest. "Do not cry." Weak. Hoarse. Barely more than breath. Yet unmistakably real. Clara stared down at Ethan in complete disbelief, while her trembling hand remained trapped beneath his fingers. Tears blurred her vision. "Ethan?" she whispered carefully, afraid speaking too loudly might shatter the moment entirely. His eyes remained closed. His breathing stayed uneven beneath the oxygen support. But his hand did not let go. Somewhere inside the darkness surrounding him, he was still reaching for her. The backup generator suddenly roared alive beneath the building. Light flooded the suite again all at once. Machines restarted around them with sharp mechanical sounds while warm golden light returned to the room. Clara blinked against the brightness. Nurses rushed through the doorway seconds later, followed by 2 emergency physicians. "What happened?" one doctor demanded while checking the monitors rapidly. Clara could barely form words. He spoke." The room froze. "What?" another nurse whispered. Clara looked toward Ethan again, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. "He told me not to cry." The doctors exchanged stunned glances before immediately checking neurological readings. Ethan's heartbeat remained elevated but stable. Brain activity flashed stronger across the monitors than ever before. One physician slowly shook his head in disbelief. "This level of response is extraordinary." Another leaned closer to Ethan while shining a small penlight near his eyes. "Mr. Whitmore, if you can hear me, try to respond." Silence followed. Ethan remained still beneath the blankets. The doctors continued their examinations, speaking quietly among themselves in complicated medical language Clara barely heard anymore. Because she could still feel the warmth of Ethan's hand around hers. And deep down, she knew something had changed forever that night. Victoria Whitmore arrived minutes later wrapped in an expensive wool coat dusted with melting snow. Her sharp eyes moved instantly from the flashing monitors to Clara standing beside Ethan's bed. "What is going on?" she demanded. One of the doctors stepped forward carefully. "There has been significant neurological improvement." Victoria's face tightened. "Define significant." The physician hesitated briefly. "Verbal response." Silence crashed across the room, heavier than thunder. Clara watched the color slowly drain from Victoria's face. "That is impossible," she said quietly. "Apparently not," another doctor replied. Victoria turned toward Clara then, studying her with a look Clara had never seen before. Not arrogance. Not disgust. Fear. Real fear. Clara instinctively stepped closer to Ethan's bedside. "He knew I was crying," she whispered softly. Victoria said nothing, but her jaw tightened sharply before she turned away toward the dark windows overlooking the storm. Hours passed before the recovery wing finally settled into silence again. Snow continued falling heavily across Chicago while exhausted nurses rotated through the night shift. Around 3 in the morning, Clara sat once more beside Ethan beneath the warm fireplace glow. The room smelled faintly of rain, coffee, and antiseptic. She looked exhausted herself now. Hair loose around her shoulders. Eyes red from stress and sleeplessness. Yet somehow the room no longer felt cold. Clara reached carefully for Ethan's hand again. This time his fingers curled weakly around hers almost immediately. A soft breath escaped her lips. "You scared me tonight," she whispered. The monitor answered steadily beside them. Beep. Pause. Beep. Clara smiled through tired tears. "You know, everybody thinks you are some terrifying billionaire genius." She leaned closer, her voice softer now. "But honestly, I think you are just lonely." Silence wrapped around them warmly for several seconds. Then Ethan's lips moved faintly again. Clara froze instantly, leaning closer until she could hear his breathing. His voice emerged rough and broken from months of silence. Barely audible. "Clara!" Her entire body went still. Because Ethan Whitmore had never been told her name.